Alright, number ones. You asked for it. Very old video, yet extremely popular. 10 million views 9 years ago. What Latin sounded like and how we know. So, of course, the premise is fascinating. This is from Native Lung. We have reviewed, I think I reacted to one more video from them, the one about French. You will find a link in the description. But for now, let's see if they did it right. I actually remember watching this years ago, but I don't remember if it was good or not.
So, how do we know what Latin sounded like? I mean, I always thought Caesar's quote was Veni Vidi Vici, but some Latin student told me V's were W's and C's were K's. Ha! Oh, come on. Can you imagine any good Italian saying Veni, Vidi, Wiki? I'm sitting there, sure this is wrong somehow. See, my first linguistic obsession was reading up on how Latin became the Romance languages. So why was I...
As an Italian, I say the way Italians pronounce Latin now is completely irrelevant to the way ancient Romans did. And this is a difficult and tough pill to swallow for fellow Italians. It is what it is. Also, there is no such a thing as vulgar Latin. I'm just going to put it there, right there.
Suddenly speechlessly tongue-tied. Well, young self, it took me years, but I'm back to help.
Let's go.
We think we know what Caesar's Latin sounded like, and that wasn't it. We know because, well, sometimes they told us. Quintilian was a smart guy from Roman Spain who moved to Rome, managed to survive the off-the-wall year of the 4 emperors, and then founded a school of rhetoric. Also, he hated the letter K. So, K, I think, shouldn't be used at all. The letter C keeps its strength before all the vowels.
Yeah.
If he's saying C always made a K sound, that means it didn't have that second soft pronunciation it does in English or Italian. But that's one grammarian say so. Things could look different when all the evidence comes in, which is exactly what one Czech linguist claims about the letter R. Your Latin textbook says it's a trill. She argues it's a tap. Ere, re. We're just gonna have to piece together the evidence ourselves, starting with ancient authors writing in good Latin.
Yeah, I think this is based on Vox Latina, and to be honest, it's a fantastic book, excellent read. I studied it myself, but there are 2 things that they say that I disagree with. One is this. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't think that the Romans rolled their R's exactly like we do today. The only difference, perhaps, is in double R's and double trills that we do have, like in Ferrari, where clearly the first trill, R, is stronger than the second, R. That's the only thing I would be willing to discuss when it comes to that, but I think they would roll it. The other thing I disagree with Vox Latina is the way they consider and render short vowels as opposed to long vowels, particularly with the E versus E, but I want to see if he tackles it first. If not, I'll tell you.
The first clue they give us is the alphabet, which was meant to fit Latin sounds. You hear that, English? So when they wrote words differently, like anus, anus, and annus, it's a face value hint that they said them differently.
Yes.
Meaning that long A, which sometimes has this little apex, doesn't sound the same as short A.
The apex, by the way, that he's talking about now is in iconography. It's in the monuments, and I will show you later. I'll add a section where I'll show you exactly what he's talking about, because it helps us absolutely to distinguish long vowels from short vowels in written form. And even though they don't do it with all vowels, when it comes to the distinction between the long E and the short E, they don't necessarily put the apex, they just write them taller and shorter, respectively. Now you know, you'll be able to recognize it.
And double consonants don't sound like single consonants.
Yeah, just like in modern Italian.
In the hands of Virgil, the epic poet, that C and say alphabet is jammed into a precise structure, poetic meter.
Yes.
From that meter, we can figure out which syllables are long and which are short, which helps confirm which vowels are long and which ones are short. So some E's are longer than other E's.
Yes.
But go look for short E on inscriptions and you'll find something interesting.
Yeah.
Or won't find, because it might be representing an A. Why? Well, it makes sense if short E wasn't only shorter than long E, but it also had a different sound.
Yeah, so he's going into this is exactly from Vox Latina. I strongly disagree. The idea is that they think that the short E was in fact a sound, like in sit or limerick in English. Absolutely not. That's a Germanic sound, and there is no reason whatsoever to believe that that's the case. Also because you don't need it. When you have a difference in quantity in languages, you don't need to also give a supplemental difference in quality. So E and E are already different, and you don't need to go all the way to and E in order to mark a difference. So I understand that in English you differentiate ship and sheep I get it. But once again, that's the Germanic substructure. And in fact, we had this discussion with Luc Ranieri. He ended up agreeing with me on this one.
Sound closer to a kind of
I disagree. No, that's a Germanic feature.
Romans left even more clues when they marched right into foreign language territory and got raided by Germanic tribes. Linguistic raids. We're all taking words, guys. What do you want? Oi, bring me back some wine. I want a wall.
Yes.
Yep, those are Latin words.
Yeah, and also you can see that it has a W still in English, and that's because most likely they were pronouncing it with a W, vallum or vinum, rather than vallum, vinum. Yeah, the V would sound barbaric to the Romans. It's the other way around.
And bad accents. And they make it look like v's were was at the time.
Yes.
Something we'd already be suspicious of from poetry and word pairs.
Siva.
So yes, good Latin
For forest and navis, naufragatus, absolutely.
was spreading. But back home, the Roman rabble was busy turning it bad. Good Latin writers noticed, though, and even included characters speaking the bad Latin, the sermo vulgaris, especially for a good laugh. But bad Latin can still be good evidence. Down in Pompeii.
And also spelling mistakes. If people constantly forget to write the H, it probably means they stopped pronouncing it.
Before the tragedy, a random guy comes along and graffitis the place to make sure we'd forever know that he stopped here with his brother.
Yeah.
He does something vulgar, though. He drops the H in the word here.
Exactly.
Just a little mistake, right? Later, you find a very dusty, very old book full of cranky corrections, telling you that the word for old is vetulus, not veclus, to say hostiae, not ostiae, and hermeneumata, not erminomata. Come on, people, get it together. Looks like the Pompeii bros weren't the only ones dropping their H's. These mistakes are an interesting kind of proof. I mean, you probably wouldn't beg me to stop dropping my H's unless people were indeed dropping their H's. But what was once linguistic heresy
Kind of similar to what happens in London when you have people saying, do you have it? I don't have it. Right? It's kind of the same thing. Cockneys do drop their H's. In fact, they had to specifically reintroduce them because I think that was becoming a common thing.
eventually turned into romance. Languages. These all have something. Heresy eventually turned into romance. Languages. These all have something to teach us about Latin. Wait, how can new languages be evidence for a dead one?
Pattern
We'll take
evolution.
Spanish or Italian A. It comes from Latin A. But it also comes from short I, but not long E. Kind of like those inscriptions. It's even more evidence for short I versus long E.
I'll have to probably make a complete counter-argument when it comes to that. I think he's wrong.
Also, C. The letter C. The Romance languages still love it, but before E's and I's it makes a soft sound.
True, yes.
Except in Sardinian.
Aha.
So will good Italians say vincere? In Sardinian, conquering is vincere.
Yes, true. And that's why, particularly in Northern, I would like to specify, it's not the entirety of Sardinia is as conservative when it comes to the linguistic matters and connection to Latin, original classical Latin pronunciation, but the Northern dialects absolutely are. Maybe somewhere in the interlands in the middle as well, in the center. Regardless, yes, this is one example, but another one is the word for 100. In Italian is cento, modern Italian. In classical Latin is centum, with a fully nasalized M, and in Northern Sardinian is kentu, so it still maintains the K sound. Fascinating.
Now, Romance palatalization is another story,
Yes.
but historical linguistics says these languages are whispering at us. Latin C always sounded like K, but most of us changed.
Yes.
They're thumbs up in quintillion. So you see, younger self, all of this is why when Romans talked about conquering, they said vincere. And why Caesar's phrase was veni, vidi, vici.
Good, so he did the correct phonemic vowel length, because at first I was afraid he wasn't doing it right. Sometimes when new students of classical Latin pronunciation focus on, oh, but it's a W, it's a K, they think that that's all that matters to turn it into proper restored pronunciation, but that would only take you 10 minutes, wouldn't it? No, the reality is that you also have to pay the proper attention to phonemic vowel length, which are long, which are closed. In this case, they're all long. And it's important to keep in mind. Octavianus, Augustus. So the I is long in Octavianus. Or Senatus, both E and A are long. Senatus, Populusque. Everything is short. Romanus, long, long. And another thing that he didn't cover is the retracted S. We know that the S at the end of words would have been a sh, which is in between an s and a sh. Whereas in modern Italian, except some varieties in the north, but modern Italian tends to have a frontal S like English, sun. But in classical Latin, it would have been closer to the way it's pronounced today in Madrid Spanish. So like when you say podemos with a little s sound at the end, that was how it was in classical Latin. You still have some remnants of that. Okay, so interesting video.
Now, before you go around enforcing reconstructed pronunciation on us, getting the Pope to speak like a real Caesar, think about Latin's living history.
Yes.
This was but one part of the story.
Absolutely.
Pretty amazing one, though. Stick around and
Yeah, he's correct. So classical Latin is the correct pronunciation if you are reading the classics, but if you're reading medieval Latin or if it's modern ecclesiastical Latin, there is no reason not to use ecclesiastical. And if you're reading the freaking Hail Mary or Our Father who art in heaven, do it in medieval pronunciation, do it in modern or ecclesiastical pronunciation, sometimes also referred to as Italianate, because it clearly has a lot of commonalities and common aspects with the way modern Italian functions when it comes to pronunciation. And sometimes the thing I don't like, but I love ecclesiastical pronunciation, but sometimes they put focus on stress rather than phonemic vowel length, and I personally think that phonemic vowel length should be maintained even in ecclesiastical, but that's for a different video, I suppose. I'm going to add a little bit now of information when it comes to the other aspects of how we know.
Well, first, let's start with long and short vowels in Latin. Latin differentiates between a and a, o and o, e and e and e, and so forth. We are talking about vowel quantity. It's a matter of length, length being the duration of time that a particular sound is held before proceeding to the next sound in a word. All Latin grammarians of the period never shut up about the importance of the difference between short and long vowels. We know that it was a very important thing. Everyone tells us about it. But how can we know which ones are long and which ones are short? We don't have any recording, blah, blah, blah. Well, they told us. Let me show you. Look at this inscription on stone, which dates to the 1st century precisely. You will notice that sometimes the I's in Latin are taller than others that are shorter. That is the way Latin speakers told us that those taller I's are supposed to be pronounced longer. So, fili, luci. As for the other vowels, the Latins wrote an apex, right on top of the vowels that were supposed to be long. That's how we can know that a word such as protegendi is supposed to have a long O, protegendi, rather than protegendi. Phonemic vowel length is extremely important also to fully appreciate Latin poetry. And how do we know that the C in classical Latin was always pronounced like a K? So it's Cicero, not Cicero, Caesar, not Caesar, Centurio, not Centurio. You get the point. Well, first of all, we see that in classical Latin the K does appear on words such as Carthago, but these words can also be spelled with a C, suggesting that the two sounds are interchangeable. But Quintilian is really the one that helps us out here. He tells us the following in Latin. Again, there is the question whether certain letters are not superfluous. For instance, K, which is also used as an abbreviation for certain nouns, and Q, which, though slanted slightly more by us, resembles, both in sound and shape, the Greek koppa, now used by the Greeks solely as a numerical sign. So here Quintilian shows us that both K and Q are redundant. But how can it be redundant if you don't already have in the Latin alphabet a letter that sounds just like them? In this case, the C. He's telling us we don't need Ks, we've already got Cs, because Cs in Latin sounded like K. They all three have the same sound, they're just used differently by convention. What did the R sound like? Well, if you want to pronounce Latin properly, you need to learn how to trill your R into a R, just like in Italian, an alveolar trill, if you will. Now, I know that there are popular videos on YouTube that tell you no, it shouldn't be rolled like the Italian, it should have a single tap. Let me tell you why that's wrong. First of all, Latin writers differentiate between single R and double R. And that's very important because it tells us that they have a different sound, because at the time, Latin was reproducing coherently the sounds that were created. And it's very difficult to have a different sound between a single R and a double R when you only have a single tap, such as in languages such as Japanese that do have a single tap R, not a polyvibrant like Italian, and in fact, never geminate or double their R's. Instead, Italian does, and so does Spanish, for instance. But most importantly, Gaius Lucilius likens the sound of the R to the sound of a dog. So a dog growling in modern Italian would normally say grrr, Now given, you could also come up and tell me, well yes, but if you do it with an English R, it would sound grrr. Now that could hold water, but then here is what other Latin writers tell us. They tell us that it also is supposed to vibrate. So, that really kills it. If it sounds like a dog growling and it's supposed to vibrate at the same time, it's going to be grrr. So it's a r. The M is a vowel at the end of words. I know, that's a shocker. So, a fully nasalized vowel. You don't say Imperium Romanum, you say Imperium Romanum. It's ever so slightly pronounced as a nasalized sound. It's not supposed to be an M. And this is the hardest one for me as an Italian. I really have to focus, and sometimes I still slip. But how do we know? I've got a very good one for this one. Servius the grammarian tells us meioticism happens whenever we start a following word that starts with a vowel with a final M or a previous word, such as hominem, amicum. We can avoid this vice error either by pausing or by removing the final M entirely. So here Servius is telling us, if you don't want to sound like a barbarian, and you want to sound like a proper Roman, either take a pause, hominem, amicum, or if you don't take a pause and you go all fluent about it, just drop it, hominem amicum. Now this is important, also because if you look at Romance languages, they all dropped the M's. I mean, look at the Italian word mese, which means month, that comes from Vulgar Latin mese, which itself comes from Classical Latin mensem, where you can see that both the N in the middle and the M at the end were dropped. And why were they both dropped? Because they sounded the same. They were nasalized, not fully pronounced. How do we know that the V does not sound like a V, but it sounds like a W, like in vinum, veterius? Now this can sound strange to modern day Romance language speakers, and as an Italian it would be more natural for me to pronounce it like a V, but the Romans didn't. And we know this because first of all, surrounding languages that are trying to recreate the sound of Latin words that begin with a V tend to write it as a U, which already kind of gives, like the Greeks do this, which already kind of gives us the idea that if the Romans pronounce it like a V, then why the heck are they using a U to recreate that sound? But more importantly, words that come from Latin, very famous, that reach the English language are vinum and vallum, wine and wall, respectively. Now notice how English uses a W to this day, which tells us that that's what they sounded like at the time. The Romans didn't say vinum, they said vinum, and that's why it becomes wine. And they said vallum, which does turn into wall. And we see this all the time. I mean, look at the word Augustus. It's spelled with V's, but I don't think anyone is expecting you to pronounce it Agvustvutz. I mean, good luck doing that. We already know that the V can sound like a U. It also can sound like a W at the beginning of words. And look at words such as silva, which means forest. It is, by Virgil, spelt both with a V and with a U, suggesting that they had the same sound. How do we know that the H is fully pronounced? Because in the ecclesiastical pronunciation, which follows Italian rules, the H is dropped, because in Italian the H is not pronounced. So words such as lorica, hamata, is going to sound amata. But we know that the Latins pronounce the H, hamata. How do we know? Well, that's actually quite a simple one. We have Roman grammarians scolding the youth because they're dropping the H's. And they tell us it's supposed to be pronounced hostiae, not ostiae, and they specifically drop the H to tell us that that's the incorrect one. And we see that the rustic versions of Latin, uneducated people, were starting to drop the H's in words such as hic, which means here, spelling it like a ic, and grammarians and Latin people of upper class complaining about it. If you complain about people dropping their H's in pronunciation, it means that you're supposed to pronounce them. Very similar thing about the I, so the fully pronounced diphthong instead of the simplified e that we find in ecclesiastical Latin. We know it's Caesar and not Caesar, because we again have many grammarians and authors lamenting the fact that in the rustic, non-urban version of Latin, people are starting to pronounce the I as a simple E, and they tell us that that's not the proper way of speaking. So our legionary that I recreated in the first 5 minutes is clearly a legionary who was born and brought up in a city, and he speaks with a proper, fully pronounced I. So what about the S? How should the S sound? Well, first of all, in classical Latin, the coronal sibilant S was likely unvoiced in all positions. So if you see an S, don't pronounce it like a Z. Never. You can do it in ecclesiastical, but not in classical. Now, if you're an English speaker, or if you're an Italian from either Midland or the South, you will have what are called laminal S's, which are pronounced in the front of the mouth. S. Now, you can use these, but if you want to really sound very authentic, considering that you're trying to recreate what would the majority of Latin speakers have sounded like, then you should go for a retracted S. A retracted S is what you hear both in Spanish and in Northern Italian. And when I say Northern Italian, I'm talking about like Emilia-Romagna, Friuli, sh, rather than a s, Silvae, rather than Silvae, Romanis, rather than Romanis. Now, I sometimes go for the full frontal S, which is more natural for me, but other times I go for the retracted S, abalis, abalis. If you want to sound more authentic, you should go for that one, but probably there were some speakers that just used frontal S's, so your choice. Also, now you've got all of this, you've got your classical pronunciation, you're strong and you're sure about it, how do you sound better? Well, first of all, you of course need to learn which vowels are long and which ones are short, but you can find just Latin with macrons and you will find it. This is not difficult to find. And that's important because, for example, I hate it when I hear people say lorica segmentada. I hate it because it's not lorica, it's lorica. Both vowels are long. Lorica, lorica. Not lorica. Lorica segmentata. Subligaculum, not subligaculum. The rule of the antepenult. So you stress the vowel that is not the last one, not the one before that. For example, you don't say divide et impera, you say divide et impera. That's the rule of the antepenult. The vowel quality. Here's another important one. Now, if you're recreating a late Republican sort of speaker, then you can open all of your vowels. You can pronounce them as a, e, I, o, u, and then a, I, o, u for the long ones. You don't need to close them. You can open them. So, valete, salvete. Now, if you notice, that's not how I pronounce them. I closed them. So I went into valete, salvete. That's absolutely fine for a 1st century, because we know that towards the end of the 1st century is when closed vowels, so e rather than started to become common in the Italian peninsula. Now, if you're an Italian, you can already immediately distinguish the difference between open and closed, so you can choose open them, close them, doesn't matter, someone will have done it. But if you're an Anglophone speaker, the difference between and e might be too small. I'll give you an example though. Let's look at words such as head and red. Now in English, even in England today, we're looking at British English for a moment, these are open, red, head. But in very old RP and in estuary Cockney version of London speech, sometimes these are closed into red, head. That's the difference of quality between open and closed. In Latin, you can use any you want really. Particularly if you're 1st century, you can close them. I personally prefer the sound of salvete, and in terms of Roma versus Roma, it's up to you really. But if you're an Anglophone speaker, make sure, and this is the most important part, that your vowels are, I like to say, dry. So, no single vowel, even when they are long, never make them into a diphthong. So in English, if I had to speak Italian with an English accent, I would say grazie. Italian is grazie. Radio becomes radio. A, o, e. No one says grazie. There is no a. It's e. Grazie. In English, a lot of vowels are double. You have I, you have a, you have o. Well, these don't exist in Italian and they don't exist in Latin. Those are English approximations. Don't use English approximations. Short e is a e. It's not a like in sit. That sound is Germanic. It has nothing to do with Latin, nor does it have anything to do with Romance languages. Another very important one for Anglophone speakers, work on your u. It's not gladius, s. It's gladius, us. It's a fully pronounced u, always. Not Augustus, Augustus, Augustus. Julius Caesar, not Julius Caesar. So work on your u and pronounce your e as if you were an Italian or a Spanish trying to speak English. So English. Okay, I think I've given you a lot of information, but if you like this, I can make another one and go even more into the details. But if you want more details right now, click onto links in the description that will take you to Polymathy, where my friend Luke, who is a very talented linguist, will take you into a journey onto how to improve your pronunciation of classical Latin.
Cool. I hope you liked the video. Thank you for watching.